Thank you very much. I'm going to have to negotiate if there's some lines outside. Can you hear me? Right. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank the big fella, my father-in-law, David McCready, for introducing me to all of you here today in the first instance. I might just start by giving you a little bit of my story so that I can kind of conceptualise what it is that I want to talk to you about today. Basically, I'm an artist who started as an actor, then as a writer, and then as a director in theatre, although probably it's more accurate to describe what I do as live performance. And I still work in live performance today, but not exclusively. From this initial practice, I developed what I call a cross-sectoral, cross-disciplinary dramaturgy. Basically means that I work with artists across cultures and across art forms, and with experts from social, scientific and academic fields. A lot of my work's been, as you've heard, associated with theatre and dance and visual arts. I'm actually really, I have no art form loyalty whatsoever. I'm interested in theatre because I'm interested in space. I'm interested in dance because I'm interested in the body or movement. And I'm interested in visual arts because I'm interested in image. So most of my works are really about combining these elements, hopefully into some organic system that speaks to and provokes publics. My academic disposition is really kind of similar in that I started as an undergraduate studying economics and politics. I then eventually dumped economics, kept politics, and studied visual arts, studying cinema. Not long after, I enrolled in the acting course at NIDA, the National Institute of Dramatic Art, and graduated from there. Not long after that, I took up a Masters of Arts in Asian Studies, where my thesis was on intercultural theatre practice. And these days, I'm a PhD candidate at RMIT University in the School of Architecture and Design, and a member of the research unit into public cultures here at Melbourne University. So you probably, I would say, saying all of this, however, I still mentally identify as a footballer. I'll come back to that.
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
It's all going to be about football.
No.
So when I started to create my own artistic projects, it was with a group of culturally diverse performers working in a theatre environment. And around the same time, I started to play with other art forms, mainly dance and music, but also I started to engage in filmmaking. And so I started to become, I suppose, what these days are called a media artist or a digital artist. And at some point I started to apply this practice outside of the arts fields. So you probably worked out, I find it difficult to see boundaries, particularly in art forms. And as I've worked out, it's really because my practice is ideas-led. If I have an idea, and I really look for the art form which allows me to best explore that idea. So if I don't know what that is, then I'll learn it. And if I can't learn it, then I will actually start to work with other people who are skilled in those in that profession. So really, for my cross-cultural work, it means that I started to really have to learn other languages. So I can speak French and Italian a bit, and when I'm in project-specific contexts, I can understand Japanese and Korean. For my cross-art film work, I basically had to learn what the languages of theatre and dance and film were. And then I started to have to learn the languages of other fields. And really the way that I think I did this was by learning how to collaborate. That was the only way to kind of integrate the kind of person that I was and the way that I thought into how I could behave professionally as an artist. collaboration really comes naturally to the performing arts. It's pretty rare that you make a piece of performance with there being just one person. You actually have to collaborate with other people. But for me, collaboration is really a behaviour that arose out of the process of my testing my ideas in environments that maximise their value. So it's a very organic process for me. It's really, for me, it's a way, I think it's a way in which I see the world. It's how I view the world and how I operate in the world through collaboration. And I've often been called a relentless collaborator. However, it's also true to say that I have done this in an era in which collaboration as a mode of engagement has come into its own. And I think that's largely to do with globalisation. Late 80s, early 90s, globalisation effectively compressed the world. So it meant that we were brought closer together through technologies in travel, in manufacturing, and communication. And in a way, it's how would I say, it's as a result of it, our economic and our social and our civic structures have become, really interdependent. So, for example, in the discourse of cities and regions, this idea of a global neighbourhood, it's really become a maxim. Melbourne and Brussels, two cities that I've lived in some ways they're quite similar. But Australia and Belgium, not so. The idea of the Asia Pacific, 10 years ago this was just a tenuous proposition, but these days it's a very provocative cultural and economic framework. In effect, globalisation has remapped the world so that we understand it not in terms of nation states, but we understand it in terms of cities and regions. Also, technological innovation. I mean, the internet is a phenomenon. With every click, the web demonstrates the interconnectivity of all things, whilst at the same time, it's a manifestation of our understanding of interconnectivity. So in that way, it's a marker in our evolution. It's kind of like the reflective practice of humankind. But for me, and this is where I want to talk a little bit about today, the real story of the internet is its capacity to create new knowledge through viral flow, through auto-created networks, and to reshape the process of knowledge production and distribution and the kinds of knowledge that are being produced. The internet's operating system is collaborative practice, and there's largely due to an explosion of in the production of collaborative tools like social media, Facebook, Twitter, instant messaging, web conferencing, web sharing. Things like Linus, the operating system Linus, and Wikipedia, they're really good examples of collaborative tools that have basically been made collaboratively for collaborative use. And in this way, I think it's important to just kind of process what that means, because products like these have rewired human agency. And with collaborative practice now at the centre of the epistemological paradigm. And that's got ramifications for every field of human endeavour. New technologies have hastened the cross-pollination of thought and practice, bringing hitherto discrete disciplines into the one space. We've come a long way from the Middle Ages, let's face it, where basically you could know everything if you just engaged with the 7 liberal arts. But that knowledge now would take up about half a byte on that phone that just twinkled.
Sorry, David.
And for me, it's this space of new knowledge and knowledge creation that I'm really interested in pursuing collaborations. And the two are linked, basically, because I collaborate to discover things and to make new stuff. And from an artist's point of view, the last 15 years is really witnessed a kind of persistent trend towards artistic inquiry and process and outcome operating multi-modes, multi-streams, multi-platforms. Everything is multi. The shape of art making has changed from the silo to the tentacle, reaching outwards from a single artistic impulse and joining up like dots in a child's drawing to create new forms of expression. So for an artist, it's a very exciting time. But I think you could describe a similar shape in knowledge creation. That which was once circumscribed by clear intellectual and academic boundaries is now seeping into other areas of inquiry. And I think this is a much more natural way for knowledge to reflect human agency, because those silos were just created out of ambition, out of ideology and out of modes of power. In that respect, nothing's changed. Knowledge is still power. But because the production and distribution systems have changed, the question is, who holds the power? I'm just going to leave that question there. I believe it's still necessary to seal disciplines within boundaries so as to concentrate on pure investigative tasks. I believe working like that enables discovery and the creation of new languages. To isolate the salient elements of research, one needs a dedicated laboratory culture. One needs to specialise and to be a specialist. However, and this is a new dimension, we also now need to prosecute those investigations and those investigative processes in other disciplines, other modes of thinking and practice, in, if you like, a multi-sided, cross-sectoral laboratory culture. The interconnectivity of our daily lives brought about by globalisation, technological advances, and subsequent shifts in the economic order demand that we make this change. In fact, it prescribes that we do. And I think this manifests most clearly in the field of process. That is, like how ideas are developed, how things are created, and how stuff gets made. And it's why collaboration is key, because it's essentially about process. Collaboration is usually understood as a group of people getting together to achieve a common goal. But for me, there's another dimension. I collaborate in order to make something other than I could if I worked alone. And this implies there's an exchange of knowledge, there's the act of learning, and the creation of new language, all for me undermined by the challenge to my practice and my way of seeing the world. So if we agree that discretionary or disciplinary knowledge, that is knowledge that's kept discreetly within disciplines, if we agree that it no longer serves the needs of our daily life as it used to, then we'll probably also agree that our development is contingent upon our ability to see and understand the relationships between things across disciplines, to connect that which was hitherto unseen or unacknowledged, and to use this ability to build, create, and imagine new kinds of knowledge. So it's not just enough to be a specialist anymore. Specialists need to distribute their knowledge widely through the prisms of other sectors. My argument to artists is that around our research and practice tables, we need sociologists, economists, scientists, anthropologists, journalists, and business people. And artists need to be around their research tables. Knowledge production needs to reflect the significant changes in human agency that we are currently experiencing. So, in this frame, I think collaboration is really a process of what I would call productive friction and complementarity. And I want to take you through a couple of examples from my own practice about, particularly in culture and art form and my cross-sectoral work. I'll start with culture first, because that's kind of quite much closer to me. When I was a kid, my dad published a book. It was called One World. And on the cover of this book was a picture of a Laotian farmer. Where I grew up, in the city of Moran, in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, we had market gardeners, and my grandfather ran a fruit and veggie store at the big market. But there were not many Asians in my Melbourne, and certainly no farmers from Laos. So I was intrigued by this picture. About a few years later, I was 17 years old, and I got smashed up playing football, broke my collarbone, and I went off and had a recovery. Instead of going back to football, I took off around Australia because I wanted to see what the country was like. And I met so many different people, so many people from so many different backgrounds, and I sort of understood that there was a word around at the time which was cosmopolitan. And I understood that Australia was a genuinely cosmopolitan country. And this image on the cover of my father's book and my experiences in outback and regional Australia, they really shaped a way of seeing the world that kind of primed me for the era of globalisation. I'm also the product of a cultural collaboration, I have to say, because my dad was Australian from English-born parents, and my mother was Italian. So, but actually my name's Pledge, obviously, which is my father's name. And because I didn't have my mother's name, which was Stellato, Giuditta Stellato, was my mother, I really didn't identify as Italian. I really identified, as an Australian, white, young, male Australian. But it's interesting because I kind of thought perhaps this, this hybridity that was once removed from me, that I could kind of witness because I experienced it quite closely, that it actually made me curious about other cultures. And certainly growing up in Australia that was cosmopolitan and multicultural, it really helped. But it wasn't until globalisation really became a selling point, that meant that cultural diversity became a selling point for a country and a signifier for individual citizens, that it actually shifted dynamically. In the arts we have this word exchange, which is sort of like in sort of the globalisation frames, interchange you would call it. But exchange, you do international exchange projects. So I've done many international exchange projects from what used to be the Soviet Union to all, Seoul and Shanghai and in Asia. I've spent a lot of time in Asia. But I really learned about cross-cultural collaboration in my own backyard in Melbourne. About 20 years ago, 1993, the then artistic director of the Melbourne Festival came to me and said, well, actually he didn't come to me, I went to him. And I think I know him so much that he actually said, you can go and make this production. And I wanted to make a production of Titus Andronicus. I don't know if you know Titus Andronicus. It's a brutal play. Oh my God, it's brutal. It's racist, it's violent, it's ethnic cleansing, it's really tough work. But I thought it would be a good forum to comment on what I'd observed to be a kind of an aspect of Australia's racism, which is that those who are often the most racist are the ones who have recently arrived, because they live in fear of what they've just earned themselves being taken away from the next generation. So I carved up the 4 tribes in the play, Asian, European, Australian, and a local Indigenous people, the Wurundjeri. And with a linguist and scholars and translator, we developed a new version of Shakespeare's language with Vietnamese, Italian, English, and Woiwurrung, which is language of the Wurundjeri, and it hadn't been spoken in a public forum in 123 years. So the first time that it was actually been spoken in a public forum was in the premiere of Titus. And out of these 4 languages, we built this hybrid language. It was like the soundscape for the whole production. And for me, this process of translation and the creation, of a new language, it really taught me the value of language, of understanding that different cultures had different meanings for the same word or concept. And that translation was a process that in cultural collaboration had to be applied not only to language, but also to custom and ritual and expectation. For an artist working in an unfamiliar cultural context, it can really have a profound impact on your practice, on your life, because there's always misunderstandings. And I've had to learn that these are actually opportunities. And there's always misconceptions, and they have to be unpacked. And there's always inequity, which has to be addressed. So from my experience, collaboration in cultural contexts contributes to social knowledge, that which enables a civil society to create and determine its identity. I want to talk a little bit about collaboration within artistic practice. When I broke my collarbone playing footy, I knew that was the end of my dream playing AFL. It wasn't just the injury, it was actually the concussion that came with the break and kind of ruptured this intended continuum of, you know, I'm going to be a great AFL football player. And it wasn't so much that I lost interest, it actually was that I became interested in other things. And travelling around Australia really changed my whole way of seeing not just the cultural composition of my country, but the significance of space, and landscape, and geography. Standing in a desert with no orientation but the horizon to ascertain one's bearings is a profound experience. And for me, it recalibrated my physical presence, which had largely been determined by playing football. In AFL, the very best players, they know exactly where a teammate is. You know, you see them, they don't see them or hear them, they just know where everyone is. They do it by sensing them. To play football well, you need a spatial intelligence to inform you of where you are in space and where your fellow players are in space. And you need a kinetic aptitude that controls your momentum and directs your attention in a centrifugal force. So you have to have this centrifugal awareness. You have to know where everybody is around you, because bodies are always around you. So I started to synthesize these ideas into a practice, working with artists from a variety of disciplines and influences, dancers, musicians, actors, and sports players with backgrounds in athletics and martial arts and ball sports, and experts in the field of exercise science and neurology and physiology and disability. I set up research projects and workshop programs with this mishmash of, you know, influences and collaborators, and I worked in the Central Australian deserts and on the streets of Tokyo and studios all around the world trying to nut out this notion of how do you register and utilise spatial awareness. I started with actors, and really, I have to say, mostly this collaboration, it was about going across the performing arts. And in those days, it was quite rare to do that. Basically, actors, musicians and dancers, they stayed in their disciplines and they didn't negotiate with the other disciplines. So it took some persuading. So I started with actors, because as an actor, I knew how they ticked. They're quite good actors in early research projects because they're sceptical, because they all need motivation. Because out of motivation, they can build character. So they would always ask, you know, questions about, you know, what does this, how does the body operate? What do you mean? I can't see what you're doing. So they were very, very good at prosecuting arguments and shaping and framing the research. And we were really looking at how to develop this faculty, this proprioceptive faculty, which all of us have, which enables us to negotiate space and the external world. That gives us a sense of our physical presence in the space and our physical presence in relation to the space, whether that be architecturally or to other bodies. And then, really the people who are very good at this are obviously dancers, because dancers have this, you know, this heightened, highly attuned sense of their body. So they're a great canvas for you, you know, to work on. And then I started to work with musicians, because I'd observed the ways in which musicians, their bodies, how they experienced the way of playing music. It was almost as if their bodies were sounding what their instrument was making. So from across all these different performing arts practices, we basically built a body of knowledge that became, in the first instance, a training methodology called body listening, and in the second instance, the foundation for the creation of a new performance language that we're going to premiere at the Seoul International Dance Festival in October of this year. And I'm going to do my best to play you just the first video. And in this video, you're going to see a dancer communicating with a musician, who can neither see nor hear him. She's responding, she's playing the cello, and she's responding only to the sensory information that she receives from his presence in the space. And the idea is that she, through her instrument, she does what he intends her to do. So he is sending her clear messages. So I'll play this with you. Musically, it's not so great. What I'm really wanting to show you is this connection between the two.
Do you want to get Alex? Or Bill?
Yes, we need the
I think just
projector
get
change.
Bill as quickly. We're getting sorry.
Great thing about whenever you use technology and you're talking about technology, something always happens with you. He's just going to flick the switch out back. I don't know which switch it is on the pointer. Absolutely no communication going on whatsoever. And you need another person in the room. We did have a rehearsal.
Really good broadcast.
I'll keep talking. I'll come back to this because I don't want to waste too much time because I know we're running. So what I'm going to show you here, basically the language, the relationships that are built up through this kind of work enable us to develop with actors, dancers and musicians a new performance language. And the performance language was based on using the body as a physical axis and taking parts of the body and aligning them to parts of the instrument. So for example, with the this side of the body, we would go from the wrist, the elbow to the shoulder, and that would relate to certain notes on the clarinet. And then you did it with on the same with the other part of the body, and also, I'll show you, with the leg. So that movement meant something meant a different movement for different note for the clarinet. That was another one. That was another one. And then these kinds of movements meant there was variations in the way that the instrument is played, and you can see it most clearly actually in relationship to the cello.
Do you think he's rebooting?
I'd say so. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So does that mean are you reading their bodies? Yeah. I mean, in fact, this is what we. Yeah. Yeah. And if you unpack that, how does that happen? is that through practice. And yeah. We've done something using that it was effectively improvisation, but that's right, we've structured it with a language so that you use improvisation to communicate the language that both parties have helped make. Yeah, it's really nice, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got it.
So I'll just show you a minute of this. So the gentleman, so just to refresh your memory, the gentleman behind is a dancer, is trying to communicate with the woman playing the cello. Okay, so I'm going to zip ahead. Basically, I'm going to jump forward to my last bit, which is about cross-sectoral collaboration. So, the project that I'm working on at the moment is called Running Man. And this type of collaboration, this idea for this kind of collaboration came around in 2004, where I was doing a project called Blowback. Blowback's the name that the CIA give to an agency or an individual or a country that turns on them, and they used to work with them or for them. So we're trying to work out how to build a world. So I decided that I would get into the room as a group of people outside of the arts. So we had experts in state security, in anthropology, in divinity, and we also had a neoconservative journalist who came to our rehearsal wearing a flak jacket because he wasn't really completely convinced that we weren't a communist cell operating as a thing. But this process of the reading group really formalised what I've been doing for a while. It really turned me on to the idea that whatever the project, the process should always incorporate the non-arts perspective. And it made me link two things. Artists tended to work in a cell hermetically sealed within society. However, society has evolved into a much more complex organism that can no longer be served by artists remaining within that cell. So from then on, I basically invited people from outside the arts into all my art projects. And then I started dreaming of projects in which the non-arts perspective was central to the artistic proposition. And one of those projects is Running Man. I've got video, I'm not going to show it to you, I'm just going to talk you through to the end. So Running Man involves media artists, programmers, and experts in the field, medical researchers in exercise sciences, physiology, and exercise sciences, neurology, and cardiology. The current project team, we're working out of the Australian Catholic University. It's Professor Justin Kemp, who's the head of the School of Exercise Science, Simon Vogren, who is at St Vincent's at the Clinical Neurosciences Research Department, and Andre Lagesh, who is a research cardiologist, also at St V's. What we're trying to do is work out this. What happens in the brain when the body is subjected to the stress of physical endurance activity? And what we want to do is we want to show how this experience can be visually and sonically rendered in an immersive, head-mounted sensorium. Basically, we're in the current stages of developing the research protocol, so we're starting with a head cap that captures brainwave activity. The cap's got 64 nodes and it's inserted with gel into the space between the cap and the head to act as a conductor. The nodes, they don't actually capture this data directly. It's like there are projections from regions of the brain onto the cap. And the objective really is to capture this data, isolate the artefacts that are not representative of brainwave activity, like muscle movement, and develop a background comprising consistent rhythmic signals. So the idea is that this indicates brainwave activity in the alpha zone. It's constant, it's receptive, and it's responsive. By contrast, the background will also show beta zones that are asynchronous, chaotic, and erratic. And from this background, the spine of a narrative can be developed based on the recording of the brainwave activity within the two zones. And as we dig deeper into the data capturing process, we hope to discover a variety of textures and characters and structures that will emerge. And the intention is really to assign audio and visual motifs to the background and its elements in order for an individual to experience a narrative of brainwave activity during durational running. And I don't know if you know, there's a wonderful new invention called the Oculus Rift. The Oculus Rift is a head-mounted device which is now available commercially, which you simply put on your head. It's like a large camera. It completely closes you off and you experience an immersive environment within that close to you. So the idea is to build a visual and audio scape that allows the wearer to experience what it's like in the brain of somebody running a marathon. Running Man sits within a new trajectory of cross-disciplinary projects. Significant collaborations between artists and scientists are taking place in the visualisation of scientific data, game theory, post-human evolution, and bioart. These collaborations, they explore how to interface with and communicate complex ideas, how to imagine the future, and how to debate ethical and political issues. And I think of this kind of collaboration as bridging knowledge, to create new knowledge from an alchemy of existing disciplines a new knowledge that we need to understand, accommodate, and live sustainably within a world that's changing at an exponential rate. Across art forms, cultures and sectors, collaboration is both a tool and a practice for being productively active and engaged in developing society as an artist citizen, which is how we're seen to see. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, George.
Has anybody got questions? Any questions from the floor?
How do you tell us to know what you do when the person behind the that is that what your reference to the football was, we know where all the other players are, and instinctively, if something like stupid, he knows what, and she knows what the dancer was doing.
So the question is, how did the musician know what the dancer was communicating?
They couldn't see.
So the training protocols, which is called body listening, is basically they both work in those training protocols, which is it's step by step, and it's all it is about cultivating what we all have, the facility to have that proprioceptive faculty, to cultivate it so that it can be used for intention. So as he's making those moves, his intention is to get her to do what you saw her to do. And her intention, so he's what we call the sender. So her intention is to receive the information and to process that information through engagement with her instrument. And in some ways it's very simple, because what you need to do is to just be completely inside the moment and available to everything, but concentrated on just one thing, which is the connection between yourself and the other person in the space.
So this is sort of ESP, isn't it?
If you were to come into the studio, and I would take you through all the processes, then you would say, I can do that.
Well, with some of those actors, we've done the exercise of knowing where everybody else is and trying to know what they want to do. But that is asking too much to me, to be such elaborate movements and elaborate music too, to be behind. Without that's a lot of ESP to me. That was something.
And so I don't think it is ESP, and I think it is basically cultivating a faculty that we all have.
George Marker, I've got a comment and a question before Kerry stops me.
Depends on the length of the comment.
The comment is that racism is more obvious in the newcomers, but it's more so hidden in other people within our society. The question is, how did collaboration between artists in the artistic world has overcome the egoistical behaviour, say Sir John Goldberg, who had a huge ego, how does collaboration sort of overcome this egoistical behaviour that is so intense in artists?
So the question is, how does artistic collaboration overcome the ego in the artist? I'd probably say if you were really genuinely interested in collaboration, then ego would be definitely under some sort of control in the first place. If you really are an egotistical artist, you're probably not going to want to work with other people. So in that case, then curiosity, desire for knowledge would override the ego. And it's true, I've been in situations where, and I would have to say on my own part, I've been at fault where my ego has got in the way. But what I learned was that if I was going to go into a place that was new and I hadn't thought other people had gone before, that possibility, happens maybe once or twice in your life, then I would forego my ego. So if your desire is to find something other, then inevitably you control it and put it at the service of the project and the other people. And that work that you just saw, essentially the leading up to that, there are a number of people in a space, and their objective is simply to be present with other people. And that presence, that kind of state of mindfulness, is a state in which ego is as little present as is possible. And I think that's one of the things that I'm very interested in work. And I think a lot of other people are interested in that, because we have plenty of ego in the world that's delivering so much problem, through across all sectors of society, not just the arts. But one of the things that we actually have to do is to rein it in and say, well, what am I here for? Who am I here for? And I would like to think that we are here not just for ourselves, but for the service of others.
Well, that's basically what happens in the scientific world, and that's my background. Collaboration is the essence of success, so you lower your ego.
Having read and seen on television Lawrence Krauss recently, and having read Richard Dawkins, I'd like you to comment on the need for scientists to collaborate with philosophers and historians, because there seems to be an antagonism between a lot of scientists, particularly atheistic scientists, I think, and philosophers of science and historians of science.
Do I need to repeat that question? Because that was very well.
No, we didn't.
For me, okay, so putting scientists and philosophers next to each other, I think it comes back to a little bit what I was saying about silos, and I think the silos are unnatural. I think there's silos where, you have a scientist here, philosophers here, artists there. I think they are really about constructions of power. If scientists and philosophers genuinely want to talk to each other, then they have to dismantle their ego, and they have to dismantle the constructions, the edifices of power in which they currently work. So I think there's a whole lot of unpacking that they have to do. My feeling, honestly, is that they are being made to do that just by what's happening around them in daily life, and that what is now a border between them or a wall between them is actually collapsing, and only those that will see and appreciate that the collapse is a good thing will be able to look at each other and look at what is friction and what is complementary in what they are doing. And the other thing is that I think argument's really productive. So you don't want them to agree. What you do want them to do is to negotiate space in which there is a possible new way of thinking about it. And I think that's probably, it's a bit linear, but I actually think that's probably what needs to happen at some stage, that there actually has to need to be sort of transcendence of all the things that are making science and philosophy be separate and antagonistic towards each other, and that at some point, an event occurs or a shape occurs, or they just realise that the world's gone past them.
Father-in-law.
Thank you for your acknowledgement, David. Firstly, a comment about the silos that I find this in the medical specialties that they're tending to become more like silos and not throwing out their tentacles enough. And one goes to a meeting these days in a super specialty, and often it's so limited to that particular thing. And of course, all the great practices come from someone from outside that specialty suggesting something that perhaps the people in the silos haven't thought of. That's a comment. The other question I'd like to make is, having worked for some time with Indigenous people, I feel that they tend to have some special spatial extrasensory perception that we don't exist for the most part. And your analogy of football, I think, is quite appropriate, that Indigenous footballers tend to have this knowledge of where the other people are better than most of the non-Indigenous people. Would you make any comment, perhaps?
Well, actually, I had the, what do I call it? I had an experience in which I was allowed to play for 10 minutes for Murijulu, which is on one of those carnivals up in the central desert area. And somebody had heard, that I could play a bit. And I went, and they gave me their jumper, and I went on the ground, and I felt like I was in a completely other world altogether. There was no relationship to the football I played when I was growing up to what was being played there. And I don't know how you describe it, and I think you have to be quite careful in describing it and sort of saying it's special or it's whatever. But there was a way in which they organised themselves in space which was completely different to the way that I organised myself in space. Consequently, I didn't last very long. They dragged me and they said thank you very much, and that was it. I think there's definitely something in that, absolutely.